The shipping cost for this car was over 10,000 RMB, but after all the effort, we finally managed to get it home. Now the goal is to get this vintage 50s-era Chinese car running again. The original owner mentioned that the car hasn't been started in years, so we weren't sure what kind of shape the engine would be in. The first thing we did was disassemble the engine to inspect the condition of the cylinders. When we took the spark plugs out, they were covered in oil sludge and carbon buildup. Definitely not a good sign. With this many issues, you'd think it would be a lost cause, but as long as we can get the engine turning over, I'm confident we'll be able to make it run. Having worked on many old cars over the years, I've seen pretty much everything, so I wasn't too worried. This car definitely had some challenges, but nothing we couldn't handle. We decided to use a bore scope to get a good look inside the cylinders. Looking at the spark plugs, it was clear there was a lot of rust and corrosion, which indicated that the engine might not be in the best condition. One of the cylinders had a layer of white powder on it, and when we checked the second cylinder, it was filled with black soot and what looked like dirt or carbon buildup. Inside the cylinders, we found more carbon, rust, and debris. Pretty much everything you don't want to see in an engine. To help lubricate the parts and prevent further damage, we added some motor oil and gave it a quick spin. We were relieved to see it actually moved. If the engine is turning, we're in business. So we put a new battery in and gave starting it a shot. The battery terminals were corroded, which can cause poor connections, so we swapped them out with new ones. Next up, we noticed a strange noise coming from the fan. It turned out the fan switch had broken. Looks like too much force was applied earlier when trying to start it. It was a simple design, but surprisingly effective. I've worked on a lot of old cars, but this was my first time dealing with a 1950s-era Chinese car with this specific fan system. The switch was basic, just a simple on-off switch, very similar to the old turn signal switches. We found an old replacement switch, installed it, and tested it out. The switch had two positions, left for low speed, right for high speed. Simple but effective. What a design. Once we had the switch sorted out, we got back to work on the engine. After installing the new battery and topping off the oil, we checked the oil level with the dipstick. The dipstick was bent, but the oil level seemed okay. We took off the air filter to make sure nothing would get into the carburetor, and the engine seemed to be in pretty good shape. It looked like we got lucky with this one. We tried starting the car again, but still no spark. That pointed to the points being corroded. When old cars sit for a long time, the contact points can easily rust, which prevents electricity from flowing. We cleaned off the rust from the points, but still no spark. It seemed like a wiring issue, so we went over everything carefully. This is where experience with old cars really pays off. It turned out the ignition switch was faulty, cutting off power when we tried starting the engine. We replaced it with a new one. And finally, spark. Now that we had spark, we thought we were good to go, but the engine still wouldn't start. After some more troubleshooting, we realized the fuel lines were clogged. The mechanical fuel pump looked fine, but the oil was pretty dirty, so we gave the entire fuel system a thorough cleaning. After flushing the system and installing a fuel filter to catch any debris, we added fresh fuel and gave it another shot. This time, the engine turned over. We took the car for a quick test drive, but that's when we ran into a major issue. The car was puffing huge clouds of black smoke from the exhaust. It's a bit of a disappointment because I really love the originality of this car. The exterior has a lot of character, but the smoke is a real problem. The body has a few areas where the paint is peeling, which makes me question whether I should just leave it as is or go ahead with a full restoration. One of my followers gave me some advice. If you're driving it, I won't be able to see your car from behind. I joked back that if I'm driving it, he probably won't even see the car at all. But I took his point seriously. If I'm going to drive this car, it needs to be in better condition. So after much thought, I decided that I'd have to go ahead with a full engine rebuild. I want to take this car to some events or use it in film projects, and I can't do that with a smoking engine. Since the engine rebuild was a given, I figured I might as well clean up the car's exterior and interior as well. We started by removing the front grille, bumper, and the water pump bracket to get more room to work on the engine. With the front cleared, it was much easier to access the engine and start taking things apart. We also removed the turn signal housing, which was in pretty bad shape. This car has so much potential, and I really want to bring it back to life, not just for nostalgia's sake, but to make sure it's a car that can be driven and enjoyed. The restoration will be a lot of work, but I'm confident it's worth it. So for now, the focus is on the engine rebuild, and once that's done, we'll turn our attention to restoring the rest of the car, including the body and interior. It's a big project, but I'm excited to see this car running like it was meant to. I've embarked on an incredible journey of restoring a vintage 1959 car, a piece of history that's more than just a car to me. This particular model, which rolled off the production line in September 1959, has a remarkable backstory. It was part of the 10th anniversary celebration of the founding of the People's Republic of China, which makes this restoration project even more meaningful. This car has been through a lot over the years, and now it's my turn to bring it back to life. The restoration process started with removing the front parts of the car. That's when I realized that this wasn't going to be a simple job. The engine had to be completely dismantled. When I started tearing things apart, I was hit with a wave of nostalgia. It's hard to explain, but there's something about taking apart a classic car like this that really makes you appreciate the craftsmanship that went into it back in the day. I was working alongside my trusty team, and it felt like we were in this together. After all these years, it's not just a project, it's a piece of history that I'm determined to restore. As I got deeper into the engine, I found myself in for a surprise. The engine, which is incredibly heavy and full of decades of grime, had clearly been neglected for many years. I had to be careful with every part, trying to preserve as much as possible while figuring out what needed to be replaced. The oil sludge was the first thing that stood out. It was thick and coated every part of the engine, and you could tell it hadn't been cleaned in decades. The cylinder heads were covered in heavy carbon deposits, and there was water inside the engine. Clear signs that things hadn't been running smoothly. The more I dug into it, the more challenges I faced. The engine had been burning oil, producing thick clouds of smoke. It was pretty alarming at first, and it became clear that something inside wasn't functioning as it should. The oil burning issue was the biggest concern. After some inspection, I figured out the culprit. The valve oil seals had completely deteriorated over time. They had been so old and brittle that they just crumbled the moment I touched them. When seals like these wear out, oil can leak into areas where it shouldn't, causing the engine to burn oil excessively. But here's the good news. Despite all the dirt and grime, the engine's internal components weren't as bad as they could have been. The steel walls inside the engine were in good condition. There were minor scratches, but nothing too deep. The pistons, however, were in rough shape. The piston rings were worn down significantly, and I knew those would need replacing. The real challenge, though, wasn't just taking the engine apart. It was finding replacement parts. Restoring a car from the 1950s is no easy feat, especially when it comes to finding authentic parts. A lot of these parts aren't in production anymore, and trying to source them can be a nightmare. For example, the piston rings and valves needed to be replaced, but finding the right parts for this specific model proved to be difficult. In the end, I had no choice but to reach out to manufacturers who could custom make the parts I needed. And let me tell you, the costs of custom parts can add up quickly. Some of the parts I needed, like the valve seals, could run me over $1,000 if I had to have them custom made. It's a huge investment, but it's the only way to ensure this car gets the full restoration it deserves. While I waited for the custom parts, I didn't just sit idly by. There was still plenty of work to do. I spent hours cleaning every component, making sure to remove all the oil sludge and carbon buildup. Even though it was a dirty job, I knew it was necessary to bring the engine back to life. The engine block needed to be thoroughly cleaned, and every moving part had to be properly lubricated and maintained. It's these small details that can make all the difference in the long run. As the restoration moved forward, I also had to deal with some of the more challenging aspects of the rebuild. The carbon buildup on the valves was extensive, and I had to grind them down to ensure a proper seal. That was a painstaking process, but it's vital for the car to run smoothly. With the pistons and valves now addressed, the next challenge was ensuring that the engine could be fully reassembled and run like it did when it first left the factory. Despite all the setbacks, I can honestly say that every obstacle made me more determined to finish the job. It's not just about getting the car running again, it's about preserving history. This car isn't just any old vehicle, it's a symbol of a different time, and it deserves to be treated with respect. Working on a vintage car like this is a humbling experience. You realize that you're not just working on metal and parts, but on a piece of history that has its own story to tell. At the end of the day, the challenges of restoring an old car like this aren't just about technical skills. They're about perseverance and passion. It's a test of patience and problem solving. I've had to find solutions to issues that didn't even seem possible to fix at first, like the engine's oil burning problem. But step by step, I'm getting closer to my goal: to see this classic 1959 car back on the road, looking and running like it did all those years ago. I know it won't be easy, but I'm in this for the long haul. The work, the costs, the frustrations, they're all part of the process. And when I finally see this car back on the road, running smoothly and showing off its true beauty, I'll know it was all worth it. The top of the engine was absolutely covered in thick oil sludge and grime. Honestly, given that we had already disassembled most of the engine, there was no reason not to take apart the entire gearbox to inspect it thoroughly. And sure enough, when we took a closer look, it was filled with thick oil sludge as well. We decided to take the pressure plate off for a more detailed inspection, and that's when we saw just how bad things were. Oh my God, look at this clutch plate! I had no idea it had worn down this much. The edges were practically gone, worn down to the metal. It was actually a blessing in disguise that we were taking everything apart now, because had we finished rebuilding the engine and put everything back together, only to find out the clutch was completely shot, I would have regretted it for the rest of my life. That would have been a huge setback. With the engine completely disassembled, the next step was to give every single part inside the engine block a thorough cleaning. Initially, I didn't think it was that bad. I figured a quick rinse with water would do the trick. But when I got in there, it was a mess, full of rust and sludge everywhere. The dirt was caked on so thick that I couldn't believe it was the same engine. I spent a good half hour just scrubbing and rinsing, but eventually the parts started looking a lot better. The gearbox was also packed with thick oil sludge, so we took that apart and cleaned it up too. Even the steel casing was covered in layers of rust, so I gave it a good polishing to get it back to a decent shine. At this point, we had a list of parts we needed to order to finish the rebuild: piston rings, oil seals, steel gaskets, and the clutch cables. These were the essentials, and they were all pretty tough to get. But my mind was racing just thinking about it. There's so much to keep track of when you're working on a project like this. But hey, I've been through worse, and I knew I had to stay focused and tackle each problem one at a time. Now that the steel parts were cleaned and ready, it was time to paint them. Since I started working on old cars, I've picked up a ton of new skills along the way: painting, woodworking, welding. Honestly, I feel like I can do just about anything now. The only thing I haven't tried is having kids. Trust me, that's not going to happen anytime soon. Anyway, after a lot of work, I managed to get the steel parts painted, and they came out looking really good. I was proud of my work. Everything was turning out just how I wanted it. As things were moving forward, I started feeling the pressure. You know, there's always that rush when you're working on something like this, trying to get it done as fast as possible. But in the end, it's not about rushing, it's about getting it right. Sometimes that means pulling out every trick in the book to get things done. And trust me, I've used every trick I know on this car. The next big hurdle came when the custom piston rings arrived. These bad boys cost over $800, but they were exactly what I needed to get the engine running smoothly. That was the piece of the puzzle I had been worried about the most, and now that it was here, I felt like a huge weight had been lifted. It's not every day you get parts custom made for your project, especially with something this old. I can't tell you how relieved I was to finally have everything I needed. With the piston rings installed, I could finally see the finish line. The engine had been in pieces for over a week, and now all the major parts were back in place. The clutch plates were in, the oil pump was installed, and we were just waiting for the gaskets to arrive. It was a huge relief knowing that I had finally gotten everything together. Even though I was still waiting on a few minor parts, it felt like I had made huge progress. When you're restoring a vintage car, sometimes the toughest part isn't just the mechanical work, it's finding the right parts. Some things you can just buy with money, but others you can't find anywhere no matter how much you're willing to spend. Those are the parts that really drive you crazy. But at this point, I had everything I needed, and I was determined to see it through. One of the hardest parts to find were these steel gaskets. They weren't easy to get, but thanks to a good relationship with my suppliers, I was able to secure them for $380 each. The cost wasn't the issue, it was the fact that these gaskets were rare, and without them, the rebuild wouldn't be complete. I can't tell you how stressful it is when you're working on a car like this, and you're missing just one small part that you can't find anywhere. But now everything was in place. All the major parts were assembled, and it was time to put everything back together. I knew we were close to finishing this thing. The past few days had been tough, but with everything coming together, I felt like we were finally getting somewhere. And then the moment of truth came. After all the work, after all the effort, the engine was finally back together. We hit the ignition, and after a few attempts, it roared to life. It was a huge relief, Everything was running smoothly, and the engine started up without a hitch. Honestly, I couldn't believe it. The engine sounded great, and I was ready to take it for a test drive. At this point, the car was just about ready for its final reassembly. We cleaned up the body, fixed a few minor issues, and reinstalled the engine. I could see the finish line, and I was determined to get it across. This particular car was built back in September 1959, making it 65 years old this year. Getting it back to life felt like such a huge accomplishment. I bought it not knowing whether it could be restored, but after putting in the work, I was thrilled to see it running again. The car had participated in a special event for the 10th anniversary of the founding of the country, and now on the 75th anniversary of the nation's founding, I felt like I was part of something bigger. The fact that I was able to restore this piece of history, to get it running again after so many years, was incredibly meaningful to me. The car had been sitting dormant for years, with so many issues that seemed impossible to fix. But after days of cleaning the engine, restoring the parts, and overcoming obstacle after obstacle, it was finally back on the road. And that moment when it started, when it was running smoothly again, made all the hard work worth it. Now all that was left was to finish the final touches. After weeks of work, the car was ready to hit the road again. I couldn't wait to take it out for a spin, to see it run like it was meant to all those years ago. The engine has been completely restored, and now we're turning our attention to the body of the car. As you can see, there's significant rust in this area. The paint has completely deteriorated, and there's rust all over the place. The lower sections are heavily corroded, and the overall condition is poor. At this point, we've made the decision to strip everything down for a full restoration and repair job. This is a massive undertaking, and it's going to take some serious effort, but we're committed to seeing it through. Everything needs to come off, and the entire vehicle will be restored from the ground up. The dashboard, door frames, and panels were originally finished with a red sandblast process, but due to their age, they've lost much of their luster. The door panels are made from premium cowhide leather, strong but tough to work with. We'll need to carefully restore and refurbish these to bring them back to their original state. As we're dismantling the car, we've come across some signs of poorly executed repairs from the past. Take a look at these body trims we've removed. They've clearly been altered. The screws are misaligned, and instead of the correct fasteners, someone has used black glue to hold everything together. This is a major issue because the glue has become very thick over time, about 5 to 6 millimeters thick in some spots, and the screws can't even reach the threads anymore. So we'll be removing all of the glue, starting fresh with the right fasteners. When we first started taking this car apart, one thing became immediately clear: the sheer amount of black glue used everywhere. It's unbelievable how much of it was applied. The exterior and interior trim pieces were all glued on, and it's been a challenge to clean it up. Even the rear trim has been modified extensively, so we're taking it all off, repairing the rust, and restoring it properly. The more we dismantle this car, the more we realize just how impressive the original craftsmanship was. The majority of the parts are coated in brass and zinc, which have held up remarkably well over the years. After more than 60 years, they still shine with a beautiful finish. We've spent countless hours removing all of the exterior parts. The only thing left was the hood trim. Some of you might think that these marks are just a normal part of an old car's aging process, but they're not. The original vehicle would have had a reddish tint, not this grayish primer. The primer is a sign of modern repairs, and it's time to get rid of it. We'll sand everything down and remove the old layers so that we can restore the car to its original state. After many long days of work, we've finally removed all the old rust and paint. We've applied a protective primer to the body, which will help prevent any future corrosion. Next, we've begun sanding down the surface to smooth it out and ensure the car is ready for its final coats of paint. This process is slow and meticulous, but it's essential for getting the car back to its former glory. Once the surface prep is done, we applied a layer of black metallic base coat. Then we followed it up with a clear coat to add shine and depth to the finish. The transformation is incredible. The car looks brand new, but the process isn't over yet. The final touch is polishing the surface to remove any imperfections and give it that flawless, glossy look that makes the car shine in the sunlight. Polishing is no easy task. It requires patience, skill, and a lot of time. We worked from early morning until late at night to make sure every inch of the car's surface was perfect. It was exhausting, but the end result makes it all worth it. Once the polishing was complete, we could see the true beauty of the car coming to life. After the polishing, we're finally ready to move on to the next phase: assembling the engine. This is the moment we've been waiting for. After all the hard work on the exterior, it's time to get this car running again. Restoring a vintage car like this is no simple task. It's not just about getting it looking good. It's about paying attention to every tiny detail. Whether it's fixing the paint or ensuring that every part is in working order, it takes time and expertise. And when you're working on a car this old, like this 1959 Red Flag CA72, one of the first models ever made, it's important to approach it with respect. This car is a piece of history. It even took part in the 10th anniversary National Day Parade, so there's a lot of sentimental value tied to it. The restoration process is more than just fixing up an old car. It's about preserving the history and ensuring that every piece is handled with care. We've spent over a month on the paintwork alone, and it's been a slow process. But that's what it takes when you're working on a car like this. Every decision is carefully considered, from the materials we use to the methods we employ. Many of you have asked why the restoration is taking so long. Well, it's because we're restoring a car that's more than 60 years old. Every part needs to be inspected, cleaned, and repaired or replaced where necessary. There's no room for shortcuts. This isn't just any car. It's a piece of automotive history, and we have to treat it that way. After more than a month of work, the paint job is finally finished. Now it's time to move on to the tires. The original tires were 2020 by 15, which are too small for this car. They looked awkward, like a grown person wearing kids' shoes. So we've replaced them with a more fitting size, 750-15, which gives the car a much more powerful stance. Once the new tires are on, the car looks completely different. It's amazing what a difference the right tires can make. Next, we moved on to cleaning and restoring the car's other components. The bumpers, trim pieces, and chrome details all got a thorough cleaning and polish. Some of these chrome parts hadn't been cleaned in over 30 years, but with the right care, they shine like new. After hours of scrubbing and polishing, we finished restoring the trim and chrome pieces. Now we're ready to start putting everything back together. Every piece is going back where it belongs, and the car is slowly coming to life once again. It's been a long journey, but we're almost there. The car is looking better than ever, and we're excited to see it hit the road again. The effort has been exhausting, but knowing that we've restored this classic car to its former glory makes it all worth it. It's not just a car anymore. It's a testament to craftsmanship, history, and the dedication to preserving something truly special. Hey everyone, I just wanted to take a moment to share some of the progress I've made recently. I know the video's a bit on the short side, but I really wanted to give you all a quick update on what I've been working on. I'm still hard at it, so you can expect more updates coming your way soon. Thanks again for all the amazing support you've shown. It truly motivates me to keep pushing forward. And trust me, the restoration of this vintage car is far from over. Today we're focusing on something really exciting, the engine installation. The engine has been completely restored and now it's time to get it back into the car. Before doing that, I had to remove the hood to give myself some extra space. After a few hours of hands-on work and focus, I finally managed to get the engine in place. It's a huge step forward, and I couldn't be more excited to see it all come together. Restoring classic cars like this one is no easy task. Every detail matters, from the smallest parts to the larger components, and of course, the restoration techniques we use. There's always a ton of problem solving involved, especially when deciding whether to preserve original parts or completely overhaul them. For instance, I spent a long time debating whether I should strip off the old plating or keep the original look. After a lot of thought, I decided to keep things authentic. This car is 65 years old and it's amazing how well the original plating has held up. To find that level of craftsmanship today is nearly impossible, so I want to do everything I can to preserve it. Restoring a vintage car isn't just about fixing it up. It's about respecting its history. It's a lot like preserving an ancient artifact or working on a priceless piece of art. You have to approach it with care, understanding the materials, structure, and techniques that were used. My goal is to make sure this car tells its original story, not a version of it that's been completely altered. I want people to appreciate the craftsmanship and artistry that went into creating this car, which is why I'm doing everything I can to keep it as close to the original as possible. Let's talk about the headlights for a minute. These are the original lights, and they're in great condition. I decided to keep them because they really add to the car's authenticity. We cleaned them up and restored them to their original state, and I'm really happy with how they turned out. The taillights were also restored with the same care, and the results speak for themselves. They look as good as new. Now, I know some of you might be wondering why I didn't just swap out the old lights for something like LED headlights. In some cases, upgrading makes sense, but when it comes to a classic car like this, it's important to stick with the original parts as much as possible. To me, this isn't just a car, it's a piece of history. We're not here to modify it or modernize it, we're here to restore it. And there's a big difference between the two. We're preserving the original, and that's what's important. If we can restore a part, we're going to do it in the most respectful way possible, preserving the integrity of the car. If restoration isn't an option, then we'll go ahead and create new parts. But that's the last resort. The goal is always to maintain the car's original character and authenticity. Next, I'll hand things over to my assistant, Zhao Miao, who will take care of the final installation of the parts. He'll make sure everything is in its place and working properly. While testing the lights, we ran into a small problem. The headlights weren't working, and the turn signals weren't lighting up either. Luckily, my friend had the experience to troubleshoot, and after some careful inspection, we figured out the issue. We replaced a few wires, and soon the headlights, turn signals, and brake lights were all working perfectly. It was a huge relief to see everything light up again. But the work didn't stop there. We also had to replace some other parts, like the horns. I have a collection of vintage car parts, and I recently found a set of classic horns from the 70s that are perfect for this car. We tested them out, and the sound was exactly what I was looking for. Deep, powerful, and nostalgic. We ended up installing 3 horns, one for high pitch, one for mid, and one for low. The sound is incredible, just like the car's original setup. Then we moved on to the tires. I managed to find some oversized vintage tires, 750/25, which are pretty close to the original 820/15 size. These tires really help complete the look of the car, and they give it that classic feel. I removed the original tires and replaced them with the new ones, and it made a huge difference. After that, I spent hours cleaning and polishing the rims to restore them to their former shine. The results were absolutely worth it. The car looks stunning now. After all the hard work, everything is starting to come together. The car is looking better than ever, and it's almost ready for the final touches. All that's left is to install the hood, and then we'll be able to film the final product. It's been a long road, but we're so close to wrapping this project up.